delighted to have you join us with our panel this afternoon. It's a great privilege for me to be joined by two outstanding colleagues, Ali Imran, who's the VP External Engagement at Ashoka University, and Randy Dykey, who is the Senior VP Enrollment Management of Drexel. And I say it's a great privilege because both of these gentlemen know something, and I don't really. And so I'm counting on them to carry the ball through the course of our discussion. The topic for this panel is don't fear the modern marketplace, develop skills to shape it. And for me, this is a crucial topic. It's one that I think about almost every day because I've spent my entire career in and around liberal arts institutions. So 41 years from when I enrolled as an undergraduate in an outstanding liberal arts program in Canada to successive roles at various liberal arts universities, and then the one I'm at now, Huron, is a liberal arts university. And one of the interesting phenomena and why I love coming to India, it's my third trip in 9 months, liberal arts are under attack in North America. And the great question is, how are they any longer relevant? Why would you want to do a liberal arts degree? Canada's leading newspaper, the Globe and Mail, in Toronto, had a notorious column by one of its notorious columnists, Peggy Wente, last year, and it was "The liberal arts are dead," and she suggested the only possible career for a liberal arts graduate was to be a barista at Starbucks, and there'd be no other point. And of course, those of us who are involved in the university sector know how false that is, and so I'm so encouraged when I come to India and I see not just maintenance liberal arts, an explosion of liberal arts. An institution like Ashoka, for example, a relatively new institution, has already become one of the preeminent, most distinguished institutions in all of India, arguably the world, and has liberal arts at its center. My own small university, I talk about all the time. We're only 1,400 students, and yet the CEOs of Canada's 3 largest companies all are graduates of Huron University. Not just graduates of liberal arts university, but my little tiny version of one. And that's not what we're here to talk about specifically, liberal arts, but we are here to talk about the kinds of ways in which we can prepare our students for a modern marketplace. And it is a bit of a freaky conception if you're a young person. I often say, when I went off to university, 1978, it was easy then. There were a set number of careers in a set number of industries. Most of those industries had existed for a century or more, and you said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'll start a job, and like my dad, I'll work at it my whole life, and then I'll retire. Well, now we know that entire swaths of our economies, industries, are going to be disrupted in the next generation or two. In 2016, President Obama had commissioned a report, and unfortunately it was only released the month after the election that year, so it didn't get the attention it deserved. And it was the effect of AI and automation on the US economy. And the finding of this report was that up to maybe 40% of the jobs in the US economy would be disrupted or entirely displaced over the course of the next generation and a half. In Canada, a similar sort of study came out in 2018 called Humans Wanted. This was commissioned by Canada's largest bank, the Royal Bank of Canada. And it found 35% of Canadian jobs would cease to exist in the next 15 to 20 years. So now you think as a young person, I'm 21 or I'm 18, think you're going to university. How do I even know what will exist as a job? How do I know what will be relevant? And then you hear sort of these snake oil salesmen and gurus promising somebody. Oh, here's a great job for you. As soon as you graduate, do this. This will guarantee wealth, and you'll be all set for life. And I tell every parent, anybody who says that, they're either lying or they're fools. Nobody in this room can project what skills will be in demand in 15, 20 years. I have a mortal fear. I have many. I have a man filled with neuroses. And I have a mortal fear of dentists. So I'm at one of the premier universities in China, in Beijing, last year, and I am invited to go in and witness robotic dentistry. And no human in the room except the patient, and the robot's doing the whole thing, drilling the tooth, doing the filling. And of course, I'm just vibrating with fear at the thought of this. So having seen that, the question I walked away with, okay, what industry can you conceive that cannot be automated? And the findings of the Obama study, and the one I quoted, the Royal Bank study, and one that Randy alluded to 2 days ago, Joseph Ayoun's book on robot proofing, were specific human skills. What are the things that only humans can do? And can we talk about those things? And the skills associated with what Ayoun calls humanics. Those are things that students should have a hard look at. I guarantee you, for example, in 15 years' time, no matter what disruption occurs in the economy, no matter what industries are replaced, the ability to communicate in writing and verbally, the ability to collaborate, the ability to empathize, the ability to work as a team, the ability to be creative, those will be in demand. So how do we proof our students for the future? What are the kinds of skills that we need? And how do we allay the fears and anxieties they have about the coming marketplace? Those are all things that hopefully in the course of the next hour we'll have a chance to explore. So what I think we'll do is I'm going to call on Ali and then Randy to come forward, share some of their own thoughts on the topic, which may have nothing to do with what I just introduced. And then once we've both spoken, we'll exchange an idea or two. And then I want to throw the floor open to all of you. All of you are at the sharp point of the spear. You're working with young people who want to know where to go, what to do, what their anxieties are, and what kind of advice do they give them. I just think of the last example, and this is resonant for me. I grew up in a rural area of Canada, and to this day, the province of New Brunswick in eastern Canada, the largest employer is in the trucking industry, people that drive trucks. And all of those jobs will be gone in 15 years as those vehicles are automated. I have a brother-in-law who worked out west in the oil industry, and the particular mechanization that he spent 20 years on has now disappeared. He operated a particular kind of machine, which has now been run by a robot. He's 52 years old. He feels he can't go back and be retrained, and his life work is gone. Those kinds of anxieties are real. They're facing us. So how do we face that kind of a marketplace with confidence and not fear? Let's talk about that a little bit. Ali, would you want to lead us off?
Thanks, Barry. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I can see the food is doing its insidious work in this room. So I think the topic was one that obviously is interesting to people like us who work in the sector. Except that it summarized everything beautifully, and I was wondering what I would have to say actually about it, because it seemed self-evident to me, working in a liberal education institution, that the problems of the future, much like the problems of the past, can be solved if you have the right skills. And presumably universities like the ones that the gentleman with me and I represent are giving those skills to students, so we shouldn't worry that much. But I was just looking at in two contexts. One was that, in a sense, we're talking about the future, and today it's kind of hard to not worry about the future, because you have the Amazon is burning as we speak, which is actively encouraged by one head of state. There is another head of state who wants to stop hurricanes by nuking them. There is a third head of state who just suspended parliament in his country, which is the mother of all parliaments. And there are theories which say that mankind is going to be extinct by 2030, so where's the need to worry about AI, right? And then, of course, I had a theory that these unenlightened heads of state obviously have not had the right education. And I looked them up, and President Trump is actually a BSc in economics from Wharton. But I looked him up further, and his classmates and teachers say that he was a vocal but unexceptional student. And Prime Minister Johnson actually studied the classics at Oxford, but he got a second class. So I think we're okay over there. President Bolsonaro is an ex-military man, so not much liberalism available there. And the other context, obviously, is that while we are here discussing the threat of artificial intelligence, all of us are merrily sharing every possible detail of our life, voluntarily or involuntarily, with the seductive ladies called Alexa and Siri right? How many of you have either Alexa or Siri in this room? So they're listening, right? And not only that, we're sharing every possible aspect of our life, including the route we took from our hotel to this place, what we ate for lunch, how much we had to walk to get to the eating place, how much we had to walk here, what we're going to do after this. With 3 apps, Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram, all owned by the same person, right? Which is Mark Zuckerberg. Of course, there's a theory that Mark himself is a robot. If you see his testimony to the Congress, you would agree with me. Mark, I know you're listening, so that was meant for you to hear. So I think as practitioners of this liberal education philosophy, I think obviously we are living it and we are imparting it to our students. But there is enough evidence to suggest that it's firmly grounded in what is going to be needed in the future. There are various people, not all from the liberal education space, who have said that the skills which are going to be required in the future are not easily taught today. And as people who are, many of us are from the Indian education system, which strongly encourages engineering. So if you have good marks, you will get into engineering. I'm an engineer myself. Obviously, I'm an exception to the rule in that my communication skills are excellent. But one of the issues with our engineering colleges is that engineers cannot work with other people, not even other engineers. They cannot write an email persuading somebody about something. They have a view that what they have to say is correct and what everyone else has to say is not correct. All of these are things that we do away with in a liberal education institution. There's a prominent individual in the AI world who's called the Oracle of AI, actually. It's a gentleman called K.F. Lee, who has worked at Microsoft, Google, and Apple. So he's worked at 3 of the 5 most important companies of today. And he says that the 3 skills which AI he feels will not do away with. First of all, he says that AI is fundamentally going to do away with a lot of stuff. It's going to be like the invention of electricity. But he feels that creative jobs, complex and strategic jobs, and empathetic jobs are things that AI cannot do. So the dentist example quoted by Barry, I don't think there's anyone in this room who likes to go to a dentist. I don't either. But it helps to have a reassuring face above you rather than a robot operating on your teeth. So you can't even say, hey, that's hurting, or can I just take a rain check today, or will I get a chocolate afterwards to make me feel better? So creative jobs, strategic and complex jobs, and empathetic jobs are in no danger. I'll give you an example of creative jobs. How many of you follow Game of Thrones in this room? So this is a slightly dated example. It's only 2 years, but today things get dated in 2 years. So George R.R. Martin has been threatening to write the 7th book for a while. And he hasn't got around to it. The show's over on TV and he still hasn't written it. So there's a Game of Thrones fan called Zach Thott who generated the book called The Winds of Winter using AI. So he threw in all the words in the first 6 books into an AI program, and it generated a book. So I will read one line out to you and see how you like it. This was in 2017. This dragon does not say we had 4 of a band, or no man or rats and 2 singers, the great pack of men and the winged trees. I think you need to have several glasses of wine to actually appreciate the creativity of this particular AI. Now, I mean, of course I'm being funny. The fact is that from then to now, it has improved. And today there are short stories being written by AI, but you would not pay to read them. I mean, that much I can tell you. Empathetic jobs typically are jobs which involve understanding the other person, reading expressions, reading voices. Yahoo, for example, is training its software to figure out when people are being sarcastic on the internet. I don't know what success they've had with it. But human beings, so far at least, are far more complex than machines. And to that extent, if you can understand human beings, which many of us as counselors have to on a daily basis, we have less to fear than a program. The third is obviously complex and strategic jobs. I mean, you would not like to be run by, you would not like a corporation to be run by a robot. Like I just said, maybe Zuck is a robot, but most others are still human beings. These are complex matrices of decision making. You do not want a machine to spit out a decision. That's what leads to things like clamping down on particular states, which I'm not going to get further into. But it's like you don't take all the variables into account. You just say, okay, the human part doesn't matter. X plus Y is equal to Z, and we're done. The other aspect, obviously, is that AI is believed to generate more jobs than it will take away, because you will need to deal with the post-AI world, for which also you will need many of the same skills. And hopefully the universities that we are at are teaching those skills. The theory is that there are three sort of new work areas which will emerge once AI becomes as mainline as it's going to. One is the trainers, which is people who will train the AI to do its job. They don't have to be computer programmers. They have to be people who understand the human being who's going to receive the AI. So they feed human behavior into the AI so that it does its job better. So those are the trainers. The second are the explainers, people who will have to explain the impact of AI to the public, to authorities, to regulators, and therefore they have to understand the AI, but they also have to understand law, and they have to understand complex interactions which happen there. And the third are the sustainers, so people who will have to evaluate how an AI is working, tweak it if necessary, keep it in the area of human friendliness. So again, these are areas which a liberal education graduate is far more equipped to understand than someone who's had a pure vertical education. The last thing obviously on this is that one of the things we say at Ashoka, and I suspect even at Drexel and Huron, is the liberal arts basically teach you how to learn. So one is what you're learning, but the other is how to learn. And therefore, it's a lifelong ability to learn. Your knowledge may become extinct. You may be facing a situation where an entire category has changed. But you can learn whatever is required to stay relevant. And that's a powerful skill. And we always talk of this T-shaped person. So when you come into a liberal arts program, you get a broad education. So for example, at Ashoka where I am, we have a set of foundation courses which teach you all the various subjects which make up liberal arts education, including economics and history. And it doesn't matter what you're going to do finally, but you'll have to study these, which gives you a broad base. And then you go deep into the major which you're going to take. So presumably in the future, just a T-shape may not be enough. It may be more of a zigzag pattern, but it'll just be a lot of T's basically replicating themselves. And that is a skill that we are imparting. We have seen it in our students, people who passed out from Ashoka, whether doing history or philosophy or political science, have taken up jobs which are in the corporate sector, which are in consulting. And on the obverse side, people who've done computer science have taken up jobs in the social sector. So I think it's really about adaptability, about being able to learn for life, about being able to understand people, work in teams, and as Barry said, communicate in written form and spoken form. So I think once you have that arsenal with you, then you're far from being a barista. If you were a barista, you'd be a very smart barista. Howard Schultz, by the way, is a liberal arts graduate, of course, you should know that. So is Elon Musk, who's both a physics and economics graduate. So I don't think I'm going to praise liberal arts anymore. I think I'll leave it to Randall also to say a few things about it, and then we'll get back to the discussion. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. So I'm going to put a little broader frame on this, and this is something that I've thought a lot about in my role, and having been at multiple institutions. I'm the product of a liberal arts education as an undergrad, but also a large Research One university. So I frame this around talent. I think talent is our most important global commodity. So if you've had a chance to read Ben Wildavsky's book, The Great Brain Race, How Global Universities Are Changing the World, it really talks about talent almost as a commodity, that countries are trading talent, that they think about talent in that way. Policies change so that talent stays at home as opposed to moving to another country. And I think a lot of the frame around this, it makes a lot of sense for me if I think about talent. I also think that we're on the front end of a global workforce crisis. We're already seeing, especially in some disciplines and some fields, a talent deficit that's only going to become more acute. If you have a chance, there's a German economist named Rainer Strack who's done an excellent TED Talk. He's internationally known, has researched and speaks on this topic a lot. But It's a 14, 15-minute TED Talk called The Workforce Crisis of 2030 and How to Start Solving It Today. It's well worth watching. And in this TED Talk, but also in a lot of is being shared and a lot of the research that's been done on what's happening in terms of workforce, there are several major factors in what's happening. One is declining birth rates in some of the world's largest economies for over the last 2-3 decades. As my colleagues have shared, automation, artificial intelligence, and the impact on work. So there'll be a skills mismatch. And as folks in higher ed who have leadership roles in higher ed, we have a significant role in thinking carefully about what those skills might be. Now, as my colleagues have shared as well, to know what those skill sets might be exactly in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years is a pretty difficult task. But there is a frame around which curricular reform, changes in pedagogy can be implemented to try to address that in what I think is the best way possible. So there'll be fewer workers, there'll be a skills mismatch because of how roles are changing and because our curricula won't be providing the skills that students need. And then there'll be a cultural challenge because the work that is available isn't just going to be in one place, one part of the world, one country. There will be larger deficits in some countries than others, and there'll be a cultural challenge that comes with that in terms of my first life, I worked for an engineering firm. I know that civil engineering, how it's practiced in one country and how it's practiced in another, the fundamentals are the same, but the laws, the rules, the cultures are very different. And that cultural challenge, cultural mismatch as well, will be a challenge if we're not thinking about it in terms of how we're developing curriculum and also pedagogy. So this notion of curricular reform, I think the debate, the conversation around the liberal arts versus professional studies or very specific discipline-related skills, I don't think that that's a reasonable debate to have anymore. Now, I say that having made that argument many, many, many times in my career, having worked at and as a product of a liberal arts education. But many institutions, I was at NYU for quite a while, NYU is not seen as a liberal arts college, but the College of Arts and Science was described by the president and the provost and others as the liberal arts core, the liberal arts heart of the university. And there was an expectation that students had content, but I think it's more important than just the content. It's the pedagogy. It's how students are evaluated. It's a requirement to work in teams. So for me, this notion of liberal arts versus professional studies, the lines are very, very blurred. More so now than they might have been 35 years ago. Yes, 35 years ago when I started working in higher ed. So I think folks who are being progressive and really thinking about what's coming next are thinking about that exactly. What are the right skill sets? It can't just be all liberal arts. It can't just be all professional studies. So again, it's not just about curriculum. It's not just about content. It's about pedagogy and how students are evaluated and how they're required to work together. And are they writing in a course or are they not? And we could talk about that for quite some time. So I want to go through this quickly because I want to make sure we have time. But so Joseph Aoun was mentioned. Robot Proof, I would encourage everyone to read it. It's kind of the most thoughtful summary that I've read of what's coming, what's happening. And in his book, so Drexel is a cooperative education university. Our students have 3 6-month co-ops as part of their graduation requirements. So they're in the class, they're working professionally, they're in the class. Joseph Aoun is at Northeastern, and Northeastern is also a cooperative education school. So I'm a bit of a fan of Joseph Aoun's, so I'll admit that right up front. But he talks about any curricular reform, any curriculum that is developed at an institution. He talks about pedagogy as well, but there are 3 what he describes as literacies, and I think these are themes through much of what's been said by my colleagues as well. There's technological literacy. You don't have to be a coder, but you better understand what is possible with technology. There's data literacy. You don't have to be a data scientist, but you better be a smart, good consumer of data. And human literacy. And the human literacies are the things that we've been talking about. Communication skills, critical thinking, problem solving, team building, leadership. And that those combinations of skills will put students, people in a place where they are more likely to be robot proof, where they're more likely to be in roles where the human part of the position is what allows them to have a career. And careers, I think, moving forward, and I can speak for myself, this has been true for me, but moving forward, it's not going to be a single path, as was shared. It's going to be, this is my career, and in 10 years, my role has changed in a way that now I need a new set of skills, so reskilling, upskilling is going to be a pretty significant part of it as well. As a quick example, as a cooperative education school, we have about 5,000 students a year who are out on co-op. And we have over 1,600 co-op partners around the world. And we work with some of the largest, most well-known accounting firms in the world. And they are hiring fewer and fewer accountants as co-ops. And the reason is, most of those co-ops were doing auditing. They were sitting in a cubicle somewhere, poring over the records of a company. That is becoming almost completely automated. Everything's digitized. It's faster, it's more efficient, it's cheaper, it's more accurate. But what those accounting firms are looking for, people who might have some accounting skills but are systems thinkers. You could be a coder with an accounting background and run a division. So that's a very clear example that we're seeing today of how accounting is changing in a way that if we're not sensitive to that, if we're not thinking about that in terms of our curriculum, our students aren't going to be well prepared for those roles moving forward. Very quickly, MIT, it's been a year or so ago, put together a task force around work of the future to just think about this specifically. So it really is at the forefront of our thinking, at least, at my institution, in terms of how we think about pedagogy, curriculum, and how we move those things forward. And it all has to be informed. This isn't about train people for very specific jobs. It's train people so they're prepared for the kinds of jobs that are likely to be available as we move forward. So and I share this with my colleagues all the time, there's a voice in the back of my head that's screaming almost every minute of every day that we need to get moving, we need to get moving. My biggest concern in all of this is that institutions in general aren't structured to be nimble and make these changes in as quickly a way as we need to be as effective and efficient in making these changes. And that culture also becomes an issue at institutions. If we're not really thinking in more of an interdisciplinary way, if we're not thinking in more of a team and team-building way, there are no single discipline problems in the world. And there are no single discipline solutions to those problems. So I think that's a really important point in the conversation as well. How do we, in our roles, make sure that we're influencing the thinking of students in high school, of high schools, of colleges and universities? So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Randy and Ali. And I'm going to pose a question to each of you to answer, and I'll just stay here. I'll take a shot at it. And then we're going to throw the floor open. The chancellor of my university, Huron University, is a guy named Prem Watsa. Prem is an Indian-born Canadian businessman, the most successful Indian-born Canadian business person. He's often referred to as Canada's Warren Buffett. He arrived in Canada in the mid-'70s with 8 rupees in his pocket. And he now controls 51% of Fairfax Financial, which is worth $41 billion. And Fairfax has 300,000 employees in India. And the day that I asked Prem to be my chancellor, and he took 2 months to think about it before he gave me the answer and said yes, I asked him this question. I said, Prem, can you be an ethical person and successful at your level in business? And his answer, and Prem's quite a deeply spiritual person, was very, not only you can, you need to be. And I was a little startled by that. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, look, it's actually pretty easy to make $1 billion. I can show you. And I thought, okay, sure, please do that. But he said, to stay in business as I intend to, that I pass it on to my children and their children, you have to have an ethical center or a core, because people won't want to do business with you after a while if you don't have integrity. And so this will become clear in a minute, I think, hopefully, why we're tied. So many of you at independent schools here in India and around the world put a great deal of emphasis on character and ethical development. I visited your schools, there's signs up, you talk to your students about it. And the topic today is Don't Fear the Marketplace, Shape It. Well, shape it means it implies a kind of leadership. Post-2008, and sort of collapse of confidence in the financial sector in North America and around the world, I think a lot of us question the ethical center of many leaders in business, not just politics. So you're working away at all the time to develop that sense of moral character in your schools. Then students go off to post-secondary, and they never hear another word about it again, at least in North America. We prepare you for jobs, we give you a credential, but it's as if we're morally indifferent to the choices you're making. And I want to get the different perspectives, if I can, of Ali and Randall on this, and it's almost like radioactivity at Canadian universities to speak in any way about anything moral, political, or ethical, because you're afraid the government will get annoyed and you'll lose your funding or something like that. I think Ashok has a little bit different take on terms of that. So I'll ask Ali and then Randall's thought about it. And the reason I'm asking this in this context is I think we're facing a hell of a lot of problems. Ali referred to them now. I think we need students to take a leadership role in society. And that has to be amongst this skill set. Not just critical thinking, not just all of those human skills, but a kind of moral and ethical leadership. How can we impart that, Ali? I think that mic is live.
Yeah. So I think, one of the things that we do declare pretty early is that we are preparing students to be leaders, decision makers, communicators, but also ethical individuals. And to that extent, it's very much built into what we do. And the moral, political, and other such adjectives aspect of everything is built into the conversation. So to that extent, I think we do try to drive that point home. But I think that also going forward, apart from AI, the other big thing which is going to happen where this will come into play is that all of us can see what the lack of ethics has done to our oceans, to the climate, to communities, to the polar ice caps, to the Amazon rainforest, indeed. And so my belief, and I think a lot of us do believe the same, is that it is going to be a circle and it's going to come back, and ethics is going to be front and center of a business conversation. It may not look likely today, but it is going to happen because the impact is just too severe. And I think when it starts hurting you personally is when you realize what it has led to. In India, by the way, we have some examples of people who've built very large businesses while being completely ethical. So Azim Premji of Wipro is an example, who has very often not done things which would have earned him a lot more than he already earned because they involved a breach of ethics. And to that extent, we have live role models. Ratan Tata used to be one such role model till a couple of episodes happened a couple of years ago, but he's kind of still there in many ways. And lastly, I think from a business point of view, there are examples which say that, and this will appeal to business leaders, that sustainable businesses are also profitable businesses. And to that extent, it is not mutually exclusive to make the moral choice and also fulfill your shareholders' aspirations. So I think we see no fundamental disconnect between doing business and being ethical at the same time.
Randy, what do you think? Is it anything universities should be involved in? And if so, how would they do it?
So a couple of quick thoughts, I guess. For me, and I'm not a clinical psychologist. Our athletic director happens to be a clinical psychologist. I wish he was here. But by the time a student's 17 or 18 years old, to what degree, there's certainly room to help students understand what is ethical behavior. But if they don't have a pretty good understanding of that, by the time they get to our institutions, I'd be pretty concerned. And it doesn't mean that there aren't students in that mix. But for me, it's thinking about what role can or should the institution have in shaping the behavior of students that have had, their parents and their friends and their teachers. So that's kind of the first thought. I don't have an answer for that, but I think that's a topic that we would need to discuss. But I think the biggest issue is institutional behavior. How do you behave as an institution? So there are courses like ethics in business, and there are courses in lots of our programs and majors where people talk about what is ethical behavior. But it's really, I think, by example. And in the U.S., things like immigration and DACA, and how do you respond to that when populations in your immediate neighborhood are either under-resourced, underprivileged? Do you take a responsibility around that? Where we really push involvement in the community, civic engagement, and all of our students as freshmen are required to spend time in the community. As a university, we're building a K-8 school because of our surrounding neighborhood is a very underrepresented, under-resourced community. So we take an active role in that. So I really think on the local level, taking responsibility in your community, making sure that students understand they have a role, that it's not just about them, it's not just about us as an institution, it's about what good can we do. We consider ourselves an anchor institution in Philadelphia, and we need to act that way. Beyond that, I think also on a more global level, taking a stand on immigration, taking a stand on DACA, taking a stand on social issues, even when sometimes it might not be in line with the leadership of the country, or which in my mind is a good thing, not to talk politics at this point in the US, but I think that also is leading by example. And then there are examples like Boeing, like Johnson & Johnson, where large corporations have taken shortcuts, where they haven't, they thought more about bottom line than outcome. And, those are examples too, I think, at a more macro level. And our students, all of our students are incredibly bright, and they get it. It doesn't mean that they won't make bad decisions along the way, but I think if there's one thing I would say, it's institutional behavior. How are you setting an example as an institution?
Yeah, I think that's a tremendous point. I mean, Drexel's almost 130-year-old institution right from the get-go. It's been engaged through this kind of leadership with community. And yeah, if you just preach to students about ethical behavior and you're not doing it as an institution, it's pointless. But if you lead with your behavior, you don't need to do the preaching part. So what I thought we'd do now, we've got close to 20 minutes left, is we would throw the floor open. I think there might be a handheld mic or two floating around. Any questions? And remember, I know nothing. They know a whole lot, so please direct them to my colleagues, please, in the front row. Maybe, Ali, can you hand me that handheld mic, or Anjali? It might work. Here we go. This, is a very famous joke. How many academics does it take to turn on a microphone? But anyway.
It's a good joke. Hi, everybody, and I'm a science graduate, so I have one question to Dr. Ali. Science is something, that gives you rational thinking and search for truth. Some way, it is ethical. And we're enjoying science every now and then. If it is around us, then why you need there is a kind of liberal art must be there. So AI and all those robotics is a part of science. There is ethics is involved. Then is there any specific necessity we'll be talking about liberal art? What is that context? I'd like to know. Thank you.
So if I understand the question, because AI is part of science, what might be the broader frame around it? I don't think that AI is just about science. It's about social behavior. It's about ethical behavior. There are going to be questions asked. There are questions asked now. Is it right for us to have robots doing certain things? What are the implications for humans? Is there ever a point at which there'll be consciousness, and what happens then? And I am not an expert by any means, but I think it's much broader than just the science. It's the implications of what the science can do and possibly should do, and how do we manage that? And even if we find the answers to all those questions, then, and I was sharing some of the roles that are coming in the future, it's the application of the science. That's all about communication. That's all about, again, what are the right behaviors and wrong behaviors. So I think the kinds of skills, human skills, that are critical will play into all of the decision-making around AI, even in terms of what is possible with AI, because it's happening now. There is, not to belabor this, but there is an android called Sophia. And we were checking into having Sophia help us celebrate 100 years of cooperative education. Just Google Sophia if you haven't. Take a look at the videos. It is interesting, frightening, terrifying, amazing, all at the same time. And very quickly, some of the questions around what does it mean to have this technology and how should it be used. Sophia actually has citizenship in, it's a Middle Eastern country. No, it's not Qatar. Saudi Arabia. I think it is Saudi Arabia. So even the notion that an android, characterized as a female android, has citizenship in Saudi Arabia, that's also interesting and a little frightening. And So I think it's much broader than just the science. And the broader skills that we've been talking about are going to be critical in making decisions about how that technology and science should and could be used.
Yeah, and just to top that up, I think, so calculators are science, right? But mathematicians are people. Paintbrushes are instruments, but painters are people. I think that's really the difference. Paintbrushes can't as yet make paintings. If they do, they'll be very bad. So I think that's really the way to look at it.
I always think the largest scientific and industrial undertaking of the 20th century was the Manhattan Project, which in a period of 4 years' time produced the first atomic weapon. Most of us now, from our perspective, would question whether or not that was a very good enterprise and use of time and money and intellect. And yet, almost all of the scientists involved in the Manhattan Project were concerned with the question of how. And next to none ever asked the question why. And I think the issue we're pointing at now is, with respect to AI and everything else, where does the judgment of the why and should we do this come in? That has to be a human judgment. And the science can't possibly decide that ethical choice. Technology by itself only moves forward. Technology never moves itself backwards. We have to make that decision. Other questions? Yeah, great one back here. Have a mic coming. Let's wait till we get the mic.
And my question is, we were talking about transformative education for the 21st century, and what I did understand, especially from what Mr. Ali said, that the way forward is through a liberal arts program and through interdisciplinary education for our young people. Now, keeping in mind from the macro level, this may be appealing in the world, we have to realize where we are in India, with millions of Indian people still struggling with survival, right? There may be survival of different kinds in different countries. We don't have social support systems in India. So when young children are growing up, you'll appreciate where I'm coming from, because as parents and as schools, we want our children standing firmly on their feet as early as possible. So we're really looking at financial self-sufficiency and independence. I'm a completely humanities person, because we didn't have the word liberal arts in our time, and my children have both done political science and history, and they're both still struggling to start working completely independently. They're not struggling, they're using their choices. So don't we need this luxury of time and a family background to be able to sustain this journey till our children are able to stand on their feet and make a few mistakes and finally find out what they really want to do? And therefore is the reality of our country. Are we ready for a liberal arts program for everybody? We can't. So it will still be an elitist kind of education. It'll still be for the narrower, because most of our children, they want after graduation, they should get into a professional degree and start working and supporting the family. I could sustain this. My son has done his political science honors from Hindu College. He's worked for 2 years in waste management, and now he's doing a master's in Monash. I'm able to sustain it as a teacher. My daughter's done the same. She's done her law, but now she doesn't want to practice law, so she teaches yoga. Now tell me, would I be able to, can everybody afford this? That's my only question. That's the worry for us as a country. Thank you.
So I think far be it from me to take the load of the entire country on ourselves, but I will say how we look at this. And you're absolutely right, India is a vocation and ROI-oriented educational culture. But I can tell you that as we speak, the incoming batch which came in August, half of that batch is actually on financial aid. So we believe that people need to be enabled financially to actually agree to take on a course that they are actually interested in, but may not be able to pay for. So I think we enable that. The second is we get applications. This year we've got applications from 300 cities for a program which is known to be a liberal arts program. So I think the fact that people, irrespective of their economic or social background, are interested is no longer in question. I think there's been 2 generations of this engineering kind of thinking. The truth is, 85% of our engineering graduates are unemployable. So they don't actually have any skills, while I understand what you're saying about the political science and history part. And the third, I think, is that the one thing which we are seeing now as a change is even tech firms and financial firms are willing to look at people who don't have vertical specialization. In the West, it's already accelerated a lot, so tech firms hire liberal arts majors much more. But even here, we are seeing the likes of Infosys and others, and particularly the new age companies, the analytics companies, ironically, the AI companies, which need to understand human beings while they develop the technology. They are looking at people from the liberal arts as employment material. So while I completely agree with you in terms of the way it's been so far, all I can say is that it's changing. And obviously it's going to take some time. There's only one Ashoka, one Kriya, one flame. There will be other universities which will open up. But the fact that it's now a movement, I don't think is in doubt, is the way I would look at it. While not disputing your original point about how it's been for the last 2 generations.
I'd just like to add to that. I still think, and this is just my opinion, but as I said, I've worked at large research universities and small liberal arts colleges. Continuing to talk about this in terms of liberal arts and other skills makes no sense. And I'm not disagreeing with my colleague, but this notion that the answer is for everyone to have a liberal arts education, I think undermines the real power of how we move forward. It's skill sets. Let's think about skill sets. A large research university that doesn't consider itself a liberal arts college can build into their curriculum, into curricula across schools and colleges, the skills that are developed at liberal arts colleges. And if liberal arts colleges aren't thinking more about what have been more traditional professional skills, and that's not even the right characterization, but again, I'll go back to Aoun because I think his is the most thoughtful characterization of this that I've seen. If in a liberal arts college, the curriculum isn't including an understanding of technology and an understanding of data and to be a good consumer of data, those liberal arts students can be great thinkers and great problem solvers and not have the complete skill set they need to be competitive, to have a lifetime of careers. So I caution all of us to think about this as a dichotomy because it's not. And again, I'll point to NYU. NYU is considered more of a professional place than a liberal arts college. But every student in every program develops the kinds of skills, whether it's through a course that the content is developed to be more like a liberal arts education, or through how they're evaluated, required to work in teams. The Stern School of Business, one of the top business schools in the country, undergrad and grad, but they work in teams from day one. It's a cohort-based model. So it's a professional school, but I assure you, every student that graduates from that school has the same kinds of skills that we're talking about liberal arts colleges typically being identified as delivering. And I think that's the real difference. It's about curriculum and pedagogy, not about liberal arts versus professional schools. Yeah, around the world. And technology is going to help too. There are so many, even in the US, only about 36% of 22 to 34-year-olds have a bachelor's degree. It's not that everyone does. And it might not even be a bachelor's degree. We have to think about credentialing and what that looks like for what's coming too. But I think technology is going to help lower the cost and provide access to students who might not have had access historically.
I think, Randy, that's a great point. One of the reasons why liberal arts and humanities education, in fact, in North America went in decline, in my opinion, is because it built a bubble around itself and said you're either purely in this or you're not in liberal arts at all. And so we treated, for example, an undergraduate student from year one who was doing sociology as if their BA was going to make them a sociologist and that's all they would need in life. Today's liberal arts education, as practiced as Ashoka at my university, is an integrated form of education that says we're imparting a set of skills, foundational in liberal arts and content, but that can all be connected with technology, it can be connected with a professional program, it can be connected with business, and this interdisciplinarity with liberal arts at the foundation, I think, is going to be the way forward here and elsewhere. We have time for one more quick one, then they begin closing the door. Any other questions?
Hello. As a school, what are the skills that we are discussing about the future of workspace and how the future is changing? But what are the skills that we can develop in a school, that our students can develop in the school, which will help them in the future? What are those skills?
In high school? Are we talking about high school? High school, yeah. So I think the same kinds of skills we're talking about at a college or university. So how do you develop problem-solving skills, critical thinking skills, communication skills, etc. You work in teams. You're given problems. You have to write. It's not about any one particular content. For me, it's as much about how students, and evaluated is not the right word, but how they work in a class. So, for example, I'm a huge fan of flipped classrooms on the higher ed side, where the lecture is given before the class, and the class is all about problem-solving, discussion, working in teams, writing, etc. So that's really at the heart, for me, of the human skills, the human piece. I think the example of taking all of the Games of Thrones books and throwing them into AI, what comes out? Well, what comes out is gobbledygook, right? Because there's nothing behind it thinking. Now, maybe someday AI will be sophisticated enough to do that, but it's not going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years. So anything that you can do to get students working in teams, cooperative learning, collaborative learning, writing, problem solving, that positions them well for what happens at a college or university.
Yeah. Are you in school right now? Okay, so I think it's a relevant question for India because our system very often doesn't allow you too much leeway to do all the things that Randy was saying. But I think essentially what he's saying is you got to actively seek out some of these skills and try and acquire them for yourself. So put yourself out there, participate in stuff, speak, write, communicate, try and work in groups, try and do stuff which is outside the school curriculum is broadly the way to go. And the rest, of course, will happen once you get to university anyway.
Well, I always judge a successful conference myself, or a successful panel, when it's one that I go away, scratch my head, think, okay, I never thought about that before. I have to think about it more deeply. Both my colleagues today have given me things to think about more deeply. Wonderful conversation. This is one of those classic tip of the icebergs where we've raised more issues than we've really resolved. But I want to thank Randy and Ali, and I want to thank all of you for being with us. Thank you all very much.